Or we can do the opposite. We can hold fast to love, but do it in a way that sacrifices truth. Yeah, we're not going to worry about that theological point or this biblical fact. Nah, we'll just sort of let that slide. We'll just all come together in some sort of holy huddle, and we won't discriminate between truth and error. It gets messy that way. John Stott says, and I quote, "Our love grows soft if it's not strengthened by truth, and our truth hard if it's not softened by love." In verses 4 to 6, John applies this truth and love formula to the inner life of the church. He starts with a commendation. He says that it has given him great joy to see them walking in the truth. And that's true for us who are parents too, isn't it? To see our children walking and living in light of the truth of God, incorporating that into their decision making and their daily choices and the way they go about life and the priorities they set. We get joy when we see that they're doing that. Later in verse 13, he says he wants to see these folks face to face so his joy can be made complete. John can say that because he knows some of them are walking in the truth. Perhaps not all of them, but most of them. It's interesting. The truth isn't just something we give mental assent to, but it's something we walk in, something we conform our lives to. It lives in us, and we walk in it, we live in it. Notice that John says the Father has commanded us to stay on this path of truth. Walking in the truth is a matter of obedience to our Father. But he doesn't want them to sacrifice love for truth. What he says in verses 5 and 6 is this: the command to believe in and walk in the truth isn't enough in and of itself. We also need to obey the command to love one another. A good example of this is a story that comes from a former, very famous and fallen evangelist by the name of Jim Baker. Remember Jim and Tammy Baker and all that? He described what happened right after his release from prison. These are his words. When I was transferred to my last prison, Franklin Graham said he wanted to help me when I got out with a job and a house to live in and a car. It was my 5th Christmas in prison. I thought it over and said, Franklin can't do this, it'll hurt you. The Grahams don't need my baggage. He looked at me and he said, Jim, you were my friend in the past and you're my friend now. If anyone doesn't like it, I'm looking for a fight. So when I got out of prison, the Grahams sponsored me and paid for a house for me to live in. Gave me a car to drive. The first Sunday out, he goes on to say, Ruth Graham called the halfway house I was living in at the Salvation Army and asked permission for me to go to the Montreal Presbyterian Church with her that Sunday morning. When I got there, the pastor welcomed me and sat me with the Graham family. There were 2 whole rows of them. The organ began playing and the place was full except for the seat next to me. Then the doors opened and walked Ruth Graham. She walked down the aisle and sat next to inmate 07407. I'd only been out of prison 48 hours. And she told me the world, but she told the world that morning that Jim Baker was her friend. Afterwards, she had me up to their cabin for dinner. when she asked me for some addresses, I pulled this envelope out of my pocket to look for them. You see, in prison, you're not allowed to have a wallet. You just carry an envelope. And she asked, don't you have a wallet? And I said, well, yeah, this is my wallet. After 5 years in prison, this is all the wallet I have. And she walked into the other room and came back and said, here's one of Billy's. He doesn't need it. You can have it. He concludes by saying that's what it looks like to walk in love. It's the kind of bond that will strengthen us and equip us to deal with the threats we face from the outside. In the Greek text, the first word of verse 7 is because. The end of verse 6 and the start of verse 7 would read like this. His command is that you walk in love because many deceivers have gone out into the world. When we obey the command to love one another, we're able to deal with those who might otherwise deceive us. You see, we can't fight alone. It's only in community that we can stand against the lies. Maybe you've seen that popular YouTube clip titled Battle in Kruger Park. It shows 4 lions pouncing on a tiny buffalo calf. Doesn't look good for that calf. And then all of a sudden, this whole herd of buffalo come marching back. And the big bulls form a line with their horns. And they start goring those lions and throwing them everywhere. And because of the herd, because they stuck together, the predators retreated. And the calf was just fine. That's what John is saying. It's as we stand together in truth and love that we will be able to stand under attack. In verses 7 to 11, he says even more about how to do that. We've seen we're not to sacrifice truth for love. Notice how he describes these deceivers. They don't acknowledge Jesus Christ is coming in the flesh, yet that's at the heart of the gospel. That's what we believe. And he says that those who don't acknowledge that are antichrists. Not the big antichrist at the end of time, but little antichrists, the ones who spread lies and untruth. Love needs to find a form. Intimacy needs to be encapsulated in life and flesh. Love has to become an action or something concrete. It's at the heart of our faith. It cannot be denied. And the watch out that you don't lose what you've worked for is the thought that not that we might lose our salvation. Salvation is a free gift of God. We don't work for it. He's talking about losing our reward for faithful service. You see, the believer will have a judgment of rewards. And you throw away precious years involved in what's utterly worthless, and which will be displayed in the end of time as hay and stubble and consumed by fire. You'll lose your reward if you don't follow God's truth. Hold on to what you have then, he says, that no one will take your crown. If you get involved in something that's grounded on false teaching, your efforts are wasted. You're building nothing more than an imposing facade. It may look good, but at the end, it will crumble and find no acceptance before God. The second warning he gives is not to run ahead, not to think that you are better than God's truth, that you know more and you've become so wise that now you can put the basics of the gospel aside and jump to some other conclusion that you come up with by your own cleverness. No, we're to walk with an open mind. We're to walk with an open heart, but always knowing the truth of God. And so, what God is saying in His Word today is that we have quite a job, you and I. In an age where truth isn't supposed to exist, we're to proclaim it. And the way we proclaim it and validate it is by living it in love. We cannot sacrifice love for truth, nor truth for love. Now let's go back for a moment to that first scripture in the Gospel of John, where Jesus, during that mock trial before Pilate, is standing before him, and for a second time, Pilate asked Jesus, for a second time, what is truth? Pilate stared at this Galilean Jew in front of him. Jesus was silent. Jesus didn't blink or speak. There were now no words to reply. Jesus was answering the question simply by being. The sheer fact of his existence, his embodiment of all that was holy, answered the question. You see, the truth is never in words. It was always and is always the Word. The truth is a person named Jesus, who we know is the Christ.